It's time for your next favorite episode of the Integratedness Podcast with Jason and Jolene.
It's another week. It's another time for your favorite episode of the Integratedness Podcast with Jason and Jolene. We are continuing our conversation from last week with Julie. But for now, I am Jason.
And I'm Jolene.
Almost forgot to do that.
The part I wait for.
I know. Well,
intro.
One day you're going to do it.
No, we tried that, and it was just like crickets after. I was like, that was weird. That was weird.
Some things should just not be mixed up, I guess.
Yeah.
It's tradition.
Yeah.
So, Joe, you had a question for Julie. We're talking about her new book, Twice the Family, which is out. When does it come out, Julie? Because we're now the first week of February. So
February 4th.
Oh, so this week. Perfect.
Yeah, I like that. And February being the month of love, right?
Yes.
You were looking at all sorts of things. I was looking through the questions prompted in your book here. And one of them, I think finishing off last week, you said, my hope is that everybody can kind of do a timeline of their own lives and see how they can see their story and the dynamics of the family and other people's participation there a little differently, right? And differently in a way that it can help heal whatever's wounded, be it resentment or abandonment, rejection, whatever those things be, right? So there was one of these that particularly stood out to me, and it said, of all of the characters who reminded you of someone you know, love, or despise, which character reminded you of yourself? Which character did you want to get to know better? In general, how did each of them make you feel? Because we will often look at sitcoms, we will look at characters in books, we will look at other scenarios, and we can see the commonalities. We like to pick out these patterns. Oh, that's just like my friend. Oh, that's just like my mom. That person reminds me of my grandpa, right? And I think that when we can heal through a third party situation, because we're less judgmental, we're less impacted by the wound, we can tidy up our own business by doing that. And I love that you prompted with that question, because in my office, that's what I do a lot with people. And I'm just kind of encouraging our readers to do a little bit of that right now. And even if they haven't read the book, to just think about some of the storytelling that you offered us in the last episode, in terms of, maybe they don't have a twin, but maybe they have a best sibling that they really may as well have been twins. I know so many people who were a year apart and raised so similar,
Yeah. And, in writing the book, writing any story, you sort of decide which characters you want to have in the story. You don't want to have too many stories, because then it gets too many characters, because it gets confusing to keep the reader on track with them. But there were two characters that my editor and I had a lot of conversations about, and one was my brother and the other was my grandmother. And they both served a good point in the story. My grandmother was loving, like many people think about their grandmother. She had a little special place in her heart for my sister and I, probably because we were twins, and my dad was her only son, so his first children were special to her. But she was a very endearing character throughout the story. And my brother, that's 2 years younger than me, also an adoptee, was always the family stinker. He was the one that mixed it up, challenged my mom. My sister and I would sometimes sit back and watch this unfold. Grateful that it wasn't us, because he was a very challenging individual, and she handled it really well. We also learned how to handle him. And it serves a purpose in the story because of his character. I was having a little difficulty with my brother as adults, and so I debated about whether I wanted to put him in the book, and what, that might open up for me, and having to explain things to him, and what he might want me to change, which is something an author always has to worry about. And the editor said, just change his name. Change a few things about him, because he is so essential to the story of this family. He adds so much to the timeline. So back to your point about the characters in our family, I think we all have a sibling or a neighborhood kid that was a bit of a stinker, mixed it up, but we learned something from being around those people. We learned something about ourselves. We learned things about other people, how they reacted to them. And all of our lives are a little bit of a story where we've got these characters that are, key in how we remember things.
And I think these are the people that we don't get to choose to have in our life at that point. We choose as we become adults, which is what you were reflecting on there, right? And it's interesting because I love how just so applicable to people's, because I always like to say, like, why is it going to be beneficial to you to read Julie's book, her life story? How is that going to impact you? And it's those reflection moments right there, right? Because in therapy, we talk about this all the time. How were you forced to do things to people please or to keep the peace, or you learned conditioned responses to other people's behaviors because they were the stinker, because they were the highly emotional ones? So maybe you asked for less because you didn't want to overwhelm your parents. Like, that's what people are tidying up later in life. And I think that every single person goes through that until they get to those points where they get to determine how they live their life on their own. And typically it's once they move out, once they're not a dependent of a certain household, and they can have a bit more control over the environment that they are influenced by, because it's around safety, security, housing, family, like all your basic needs are there. You got to figure out who you need to be to make that work, right? And then once you can determine that for yourself, go away to university, have freedom, choose to have some of these relationships or not, it looks very different. And that's the coming home to oneself, that we start taking off the shields that we maybe needed up for the brother, or taking off the fake face that we needed for this person, or any of those things, right? But many times the difficulty is, how do I go back and share what my experience was with my mom or with that? Because I know they're going to be reactive and take it personally. And
Yeah.
it's so hard in the healing journey. And you go through that as a writer, trying to tell your story and also not wanting to step on the toes of others, but you're also not wanting to disregard the truth of your story.
Yeah, which was
Yeah.
something that I definitely had a conversation with my mom, and she's a very classy lady. I knew that if I wrote the truth about how I felt as an adoptee in this household and some of the things that she did, the corporal punishment was a big thing back in the 60s and 70s, not frowned upon. It's just how people parented. But as an adoptee, I felt vulnerable anyway, and so her tendency to give a good swat for something that mouthing off or whatever it was hurt me deeply. It was something that I had been placed for adoption. This is my mom, and I was horrified that I'd done something so bad, harboring that fear. Okay, if I'm being bad, is she going to give me away too? So and I talk about this in the book, the fears that the adoptees have when we're growing up. Corporal punishment was the worst thing for an adoptive person to deal with. And I learned to hold back from her because how it made me feel when she lost her temper, or I got in trouble. But I wanted to go back to what you said about the timeline. Sometimes we go back to our timeline and we learn things. So there's a point in the book that I was writing about my sister's death, and things were just not shaping up. I look at the timeline, I've talked to my sister, I've talked to my mother, and I felt like I was missing something, and this intuition. And I ended up getting a little help with that. And I went back and I asked my mom. So now I'm an adult talking to my adult mom who's got some memory issues, and I was being respectful of that. But I asked her a couple probing questions based on this timeline that I had developed. And I got a new answer. I got a fresh answer. I got something from her that blew me away. And it informed the story. I talked to my sister about it afterwards and my siblings, and they were like, we knew nothing about that growing up. So that might be something too that would benefit the listeners and readers, is if you do your personal timeline, see if you can get in conversation with family members and ask more questions, because you're going to learn something. There's something that we all hold back in our version of the story. And because my mom had, these little memory issues, she sort of forgot. She didn't tell us this really big thing. And we were, again, it made me even have more respect for her, how much she had to deal with as a result of my sister passing away.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's profound. And look at what you offered yourself and your siblings through doing that. And again, we go back, and I feel like we talked this the first time we talked to you, Julie, but there's these like intuitive nudges of I need to do this. I have to do this. And it's been really like if you turn around and look at this path that you have walked, you probably just like shake your head sometimes going like without a doubt, I needed to do this.
Mhm. Yeah, I know. So
Wow.
I guess I thank the readers for saying, we want to know a little more. Well,
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
was
Yeah, the
painful.
nudges. Yes, the nudges. Okay. So now I kind of want to propel into like personal Julie here. What's happened in this stage of your life? What are the things that you're sort of leaping forward into? Because I suspect that releasing this book is almost like releasing any kind of anchors to your past that were keeping you locked down a little bit. Like there's this beautiful release of acceptance and integration and freedom in a sense from some of the things you've described that this book allowed you to kind of break through.
Well, definitely. I lost my husband from cancer almost 3 years ago. And so I do feel like I'm in this third act, if you're thinking about a
Yeah.
play or a book, I'm in this third act. And I think that we never stop changing and growing and being tested, um, and having to become a different person or become more of what was there. Self-reliance, the sense of belonging that we have talked about before, on your show. Our sense of belonging is always threatened. If are we in the right job? Are we in the right tennis group? Is this the right book club for me? We're always testing our belonging. And certainly this new role that I have as the sole parent and a widow, I'm figuring out what that's all about. So last year in September, I hiked the El Camino in Spain with some fellow writers. And I wasn't on the journey for anything other than the exercise and the experience. And I thought in the back of my head, maybe I'll figure out what I want to write about next. And for some of the people, it was spiritual, some people, it was religious, but I was just going along. And several things happened on this trip that pulled me back to my relationship and my long marriage to my husband. And I came out of it going, okay, I'm going to write this third book, which will be a memoir trilogy, which I guess that's a thing. I didn't know it was a thing, but I am going to write
It
this
is
third
now.
It
book.
is, yeah.
Yeah, about traveling and about personal growth and the journey of grief and loss and what we learn about each other and ourselves through traveling and through different relationships.
Oh, I love it. When did you hike that in Spain?
In Spain in last week of September.
Oh,
It was
that's wild.
beautiful weather.
One of my clients did it. I'm trying to think when
And
she
there's so many
I think it was Aprilish maybe. I was just thinking to myself, what would the odds be if you guys were there during that same time? Oh my
we
gosh.
didn't do all of it, but we did
Okay.
a chunk of it, 120 kilometers, and it was rigorous, but good weather,
Yeah.
and Spanish wine is really delicious.
Oh, yes, it is. And how about this Antarctic trip? Is that sort of like just a holiday? Are you maybe gonna hoping to get sort of a similar experience out of it, Julie? Like what's the motivation behind this?
Well, it's the last remaining continent that I haven't been to. So I did a lot of traveling with my husband, and this was always on our bucket list. Um, I think I'm doing it for both of us, which I have to be honest. I am doing it for both of us. But I'm going with friends that we're friends with as couples. I love photography, as I mentioned. So the opportunity to be with these National Geographic photographic experts is going to be fascinating. And it's part of that personal growth, the third act. So we'll see how it fits into the next book too.
I'm so excited for you. I'm tearful, as you said, like I'm going for both of us, right? I think that all of our listeners will feel that and know like what a beautiful, courageous, but also really peaceful journey that will be. There's people who are afraid of their grief and what that kind of attribute would be, but you are so grounded in your life experience. And I think that's also why your book can be received well by your family, because this isn't coming out of a place of spite. It's not coming out of a place of, I need validation for what I went through. It's truly coming from a really authentic, healed and healing place of meaning well. And you can feel that through how you talk about your entire life experience. You don't talk about being a victim of life. You don't talk about life happening to you. It's happening for you in a sense. And I think that that's a beautiful energy to carry you through that. So I'm so excited for what just what joy and what like moments you're gonna get. And I'm just so jealous because you're gonna see the Northern Lights like no other up there. And that is like one of my big bucket lists, right? But what a beautiful gift to yourself, because there are some people who they truly stop living in their grief, right? And I think that you had an opportunity to experience grief and hold it very differently than you got to with your sister, with your husband's loss. And, you are evolving how you dance with grief as life has gone on, hey?
Yeah, I went and I don't always think of everything that happens as a story or characters, but my husband was a character in all of the books. The first book, he's the very first chapter, insisting that I research my closed adoption and figure out what my medical history was. And then this book that's coming out in February 4th, it ends with how we met and our relationship and how we navigated that and how we started our family. So I feel like this idea that I have for this next memoir will be the final chapter about him as a character.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow. And you still wear a lot of hats because you're also a grandma, you're also a mom, you're, a sister, a daughter, all the things. You're a friend with these folks that you're going traveling with, right?
Yeah,
And you
we are
get
the sandwich generation, aren't we? We've got kids and grandparents and all sorts of people that we care for.
yeah.
There's two last questions. One, where can people find the book, Twice the
The
Family?
book is available wherever books are sold. Besides Amazon, I like to give bookshop.org a big plug. You can order any book you want through them, and it benefits your local independent bookstore. And any information about me, podcasts.
You have a podcast, Julie.
That was my next question.
I don't have a podcast about guesting on your podcast, but I have a website, juliemcgueauthor.com, and there's lots of, I write a lot of essays, and you can find all that information on my website.
That's awesome, Julie. Well, thanks so much for coming on. We'll have to come back again because when the next book comes out, because we'd love to chat about that. I feel this will be an ongoing thing as you produce. We will always be here.
Yeah, we'll see how
I want to hear about a trip.
I do too.
I
That's
wanna see pictures.
more than anything.
Are
Yeah.
you going to share them on your site?
Yeah, I will definitely.
Good.
Perfect. We will visit that and check it out.
Thanks.
And we'll
you
make sure to
guys.
put all this in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
Great.
All right.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Julie, for coming back. We appreciate that. And thank you, everyone who listened to this, your next favorite episode of the Integrateness Podcast. We're back next week with another favorite episode. Until then, I'm Jason.
And I'm Jolene.
And that is Julie. Have a good week.